History is written by the victors. But what about the stories they chose not to tell? 70 million souls perished in World War II. We know the battles. We know the leaders. We know the dates. But beneath the thunder of tanks and the roar of bombers, there were others. Secret heroes. Impossibly mis acts of defiance that changed everything. These are the hidden stories. The forgotten warriors. The battles fought in shadows. This is the war you were never told. Did you know there was a British commando unit made up of German-speaking Jewish refugees? They were known as X-Troop. These men, who had escaped Nazi persecution, volunteered for the most dangerous missions of the war. They'd put on German uniforms, go behind enemy lines, and gather critical intelligence. Imagine the courage it took. If captured, they faced not just execution as spies, but certain torture and death because of their heritage. Their contributions were vital to today in the push into Germany. Yet their story was classified for decades. They were ghosts, fighting a personal war for a country that wasn't yet fully their own, against an enemy that had stolen everything from them. Now, let's talk about the Night Witches. This was the nickname that Germans gave to the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, an all-female Soviet Air Force unit, flying outdated, flimsy biplanes made of wood and canvas. These women flew thousands of nighttime bombing missions against the Nazis. Their planes were so slow and quiet that they would cut their engines near the target and glide in, making a soft whooshing sound that Germans said sounded like a witch's broomstick. They had no parachutes, no guns, no radios. They flew in the freezing cold and total darkness, often completing 8 or more missions in a single night. Despite being looked down upon by their male counterparts initially, they became one of the most highly decorated units in the Soviet Air Force, proving that heroism knows no gender. And what about the Ghost Army? This wasn't a unit of specters, but a top-secret US Army unit of artists, designers, and sound engineers. Their weapon wasn't a rifle, it was deception. They used inflatable tanks, sound trucks blasting pre-recorded audio of troop movements, and fake radio transmissions to fool the German army about the size and location of Allied forces. They could make a few hundred men look and sound like a full division of 30,000. They staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions, saving countless lives by drawing enemy fire and attention away from actual Allied operations. Their work was so secret that their existence was senti, officially acknowledged until 1996. They fought a war of illusions, proving the pen orientis is the paintbrush, and the loudspeaker can be just as mighty as the sword. These are just a few of the incredible, untold tales from the Second World War. Stories of courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice that have been hidden in the footnote. It is June 1944. The world holds its breath as Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy. But behind the front lines, a different kind of army is preparing for a battle unlike any other. They carry no rifles. They fire no bullets. They're weapons. Inflatable tanks, Hollywood-grade sound effects, and pure, unadulterated deception. This was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret its existence wouldn't be known for decades. They called themselves the Ghost Army, a hand-picked force of 1,100 American soldiers, not trained killers, but artists, architects, sound engineers, and stage designers. Their mission was to wage war with illusion, to fight with their minds. As one veteran recalled, when they were told they'd be creating phantom divisions to fool the entire German army, he thought it had to be a joke. It was no joke. This was tactical deception on a scale never seen before. Armed with hundreds of inflatable Sherman tanks, fake artillery pieces, and elaborate sound systems, the Ghost Army staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions from Normandy to the Rhine. They were masters of misdirection, turning empty fields into bustling military bases overnight. Picture it. Under the cloak of darkness, a handful of soldiers would roll into a vacant French field. Within hours, they'd inflate an entire armored division. Dozens of rubber tanks, dummy aircraft, and trucks made of painted canvas would appear out of nowhere. From a reconnaissance pilot's perspective, thousands of feet in the air, it was indistinguishable from the real thing. It was a phantom menace, a meticulously crafted lie designed to draw enemy fire and attention. But the visual trickery was only half the story. The true genius of the Ghost Army was its sound. These weren't just guys with big speakers. They were pioneers of sonic warfare. They went to the front lines and made high-fidelity recordings of actual tank battalions on the move, of infantry divisions digging in, of the chaotic symphony of a real military encampment. Then, they would transport these recordings on wire spools and play them back through massive, truck-mounted speakers that could be heard up to 15 miles away. They could perfectly mimic the sound of an entire armored column moving in for an attack, creating the terrifying illusion of an army where none existed. They even faked radio traffic, broadcasting phony messages with convincing chatter and codes to be intercepted by German intelligence, completing the elaborate performance, and it worked. Time and time again, German intelligence took the bait. Classified reports from the era show German commanders redirecting entire panzer divisions to counter phantom threats, pulling valuable resources away from the actual points of attack. This allowed real Allied forces to advance with less resistance, breaking through enemy lines where they were least expected. The Ghost Army was a puppeteer, pulling the strings of the German war machine from the shadows. Their crowning achievement was Operation Viersen in March of 1945. The Allies were preparing for the final, decisive push into Germany, crossing the Rhine River. It was a heavily defended, incredibly dangerous objective, while the real Ninth Army quietly amassed its forces for the crossing at Rheinberg. The Ghost Army initiated its grand finale about 15 miles downstream. For 3 intense days and nights, they put on their most elaborate show yet. They simulated the arrival of 2 entire divisions, roughly 30,000 men. The air filled with the sounds of pontoon bridge construction, of tanks rumbling into position, of officers barking orders over the radio. They inflated over 600 dummy vehicles along the riverbank. German artillery began shelling the phantom positions. Convinced a major crossing was imminent, they moved their troops, repositioned their defenses, and braced for an assault that would never come. When the real Ninth Army finally launched its crossing at Rheinberg, they were met with surprisingly light resistance. The bulk of the German defenders had been drawn away, fighting ghosts. The operation was a stunning success, and historians estimate that the deceptions of the Ghost Army saved anywhere from 15 to 30,000 Allied lives throughout the war. They played their part, packed up their inflatable tanks, and disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived. After the war, their story was buried. The entire operation was classified as top secret, a tool the US military wanted to keep in its back pocket. For over 40 years, the soldiers of the Ghost Army were sworn to secrecy. They couldn't tell their friends, their families, not even their wives, about what they had truly done. They were artists and actors who played the most important role of their lives, saving thousands, yet received no public recognition for it. It was NT until 2013 that their story was declassified, and they finally began to receive the accolades they so richly deserved, culminating in the Congressional Gold Medal in 2022. The Ghost Army is a powerful reminder that warfare isn't just about brute force. It's also a battle of wits, a game of perception versus reality. These unsung heroes proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb, but an idea, a whisper, an illusion. However, illusion wasn't the only unconventional weapon the Allies had up their sleeve. In the shadowy world of espionage and secret operations, there were other, equally strange and brilliant tactics being deployed, from pigeons carrying cameras to bats armed with incendiary devices. It's April 30th, 1943. On a quiet beach near Huelva, Spain, the tide brings in something unexpected. A body, dressed in the uniform of a British Royal Marine. It clutches a briefcase chained to its wrist. Spanish fishermen make the grim discovery, unaware they have just found a piece of a puzzle that will change the course of World War II. Inside that briefcase are top-secret documents, plans for a massive Allied invasion, codenamed Operation Husky. The target, Greece and Sardinia. The Spanish authorities, officially neutral but quietly sympathetic to Nazi Germany, do exactly what the British are counting on. They alert German intelligence. The documents soon land on the desks of high-ranking Nazi officers in Berlin. They are a spy master's dream. Detailed maps, troop movements, timetables, everything an enemy would need to prepare a devastating counterattack. The Germans study every letter, every comma. The plans are perfect. In fact, they seem a little too perfect. A flicker of suspicion arises, but the evidence seems overwhelming. The drowned officer, Major William Martin, Hassanit card, personal letters from his fiancée, even ticket stubs from a recent London theater show. It's an entire life, laid bare. Convinced of its authenticity, Germany takes the bait. But here's the twist, the one that makes this story so incredible. The dead man isn't Major William Martin. There is no Major William Martin. The body belongs to Glyndwr Michael, a homeless man who had died in London after ingesting rat poison, and the meticulously detailed Operation Husky. It's a complete and utter fabrication, a masterpiece of deception cooked up by British intelligence. This was Operation Mincemeat, arguably the most audacious and successful strategic deception in military history. The real target was never Greece or Sardinia. The real target was Sicily. To understand how this was possible, we need to go back to a London basement, where a small, brilliant team of intelligence officers were wrestling with a monumental problem. The Allies needed to invade Sicily to open a soft underbelly into Europe. But Sicily was the most obvious target on the map. Hitler knew it, his generals knew it, and they were fortifying the island, preparing for a bloody, grinding battle. The Allies needed to make Hitler look the other way. They needed to convince him that the real invasion was happening somewhere, anywhere else. But how do you plant false information so convincingly that the most paranoid regime in the world believes it? The idea was born from a memo written by none other than Ian Fleming, the future creator of James Bond. The concept was simple in its audacity. Plant fake documents on a dead body and let it wash ashore where the enemy would find it. This wasn't just about forging papers. It was about creating a person. They named him Captain, later promoted to Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. They built him a backstory, a personality. This fictitious man needed a life that could withstand the intense scrutiny of the Gestapo. So they got to work. They created a fiancée for him named Pam, complete with passionate, tear-stained love letters. They wrote letters from his father, discussing family matters. They put a photo of Pam, actually a picture of an MI5 clerk, in his wallet. They added stubs for theater tickets and a bill for an engagement ring to show he was a real person with a real life in London. They even included an overdraft notice from his bank to add a touch of mundane realism. Every detail was designed to paint a picture of a slightly careless but utterly believable officer. The cause of death had to be consistent with drowning, which is why Glyndwr Michael, whose death from poisoning left few external marks, was the perfect, albeit tragic, candidate. With their man, Major Martin, fully created, the next challenge was delivery. They couldn't just dump the body off a ship. It had to appear natural. The location was key. They chose the coast of Huelva in Spain. Although officially neutral, Spain was crawling with German agents, and the British knew that any sensitive information found by the Spanish would quickly find its way to Berlin. On April 19, 1943, the body of Major Martin, preserved in a special canister of dry ice, was loaded onto the British submarine, HMS Seraph. Under the cover of darkness, the submarine surfaced off the Spanish coast. The crew gently released their silent passenger into the current, saying a quiet prayer as the canister and its precious cargo drifted toward shore. Then, they sent a coded message back to London. Mincemeat completed. Now, all they could do was wait. The body was discovered, just as planned. The Spanish performed an autopsy, but it was cursory. They concluded the man had drowned. The briefcase was opened, and the documents were carefully photographed by German agents before being returned to the British via diplomatic channels. The intelligence made its way up the chain of command, all the way to Adolf Hitler himself. Despite some initial skepticism from his own intelligence officers, Hitler was convinced. The sheer volume of personal detail that came with the documents sold the lie. He was certain the Allies were targeting Greece and Sardinia. The consequences were immediate and dramatic. Hitler ordered elite panzer divisions to be moved from France to Greece. He sent troops and naval assets to Sardinia. Crucially, he diverted significant reinforcements away from Sicily, leaving the island dangerously exposed. The trap was set. The British, monitoring German communications, watched with bated breath as their elaborate fiction became the enemy's reality. On July 9, 1943, the real Operation Husky began. A massive Allied armada descended upon the coast of Sicily. Instead of the heavily fortified, fiercely defended stronghold they expected. They met with surprisingly light resistance. The German and Italian defenders were caught completely off guard. The deception had worked better than anyone could have ever imagined. Sicily fell to the Allies in just 38 days, a victory achieved with far fewer casualties than anticipated. This success paved the way for the invasion of Italy and was a critical step toward the final defeat of the Axis powers. And what of the man at the center of it all? Glinder Michael, the man who died alone and forgotten in a London warehouse, was given a hero's burial in Huelva, Spain, under the name Major William Martin. His tombstone reads, William Martin, born the 29th of March 1907, died the 24th of April 1943, beloved son of John Glindra Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiphiles. It was a final piece of the elaborate fiction. His true identity remained one of the war's most closely guarded secrets, only officially revealed in 1996. He became the man who never was, but who saved thousands of lives and changed the course of the war. While this incredible deception was unfolding in Europe, a very different kind of secret was being used to win the war in the Pacific. When we think of World War II, we picture epic battles, clashing armies, and the titanic struggle between nations. A quieter, more desperate war for the very soul of civilization. And in this war, the heroes weren't always soldiers. Sometimes they were art historians, business managers, or even, paradoxically, members of the Nazi Party. This is the story of the unlikely heroes who stood against the tide of destruction. As Nazi forces carved their way across Europe, they weren't just conquering land, they were waging a war on culture itself. Imagine this: 5 million pieces of art, masterpieces that had defined human creativity for centuries, countless ancient manuscripts, entire libraries filled with the accumulated knowledge of generations, public and private archives holding the records of entire peoples. All of it was systematically targeted, either stolen for Hitler's grandiose museum, or simply destroyed. The plan was chillingly simple: erase the cultures of those deemed inferior, annihilate their history, their art, their identity, and replace it all with a singular, brutal vision of Aryan supremacy. It was an attempt at cultural genocide on a scale never before seen. The burning of books was just the beginning. They were coming for the Louvre or the Uffizi, for every museum, church, and synagogue in their path. But as darkness fell over Europe, a small, unusual group stepped forward. They were called the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Program, but history would remember them by a simpler name: the Monuments Men. This unit was unlike any other. It consisted of just 345 men and women, most of whom were not professional soldiers. They were museum directors, curators, architects, archivists, and art historians. People who had dedicated their lives to preserving culture were now asked to risk them to save it. Their mission was monumental: to safeguard civilization's heritage from the ravages of war. They followed just behind the advancing Allied armies, often finding themselves on the front lines, under direct fire. They raced against time, dodging bullets and artillery shells to reach cathedrals, museums, and libraries. Their job was to assess damage, perform emergency stabilizations, and most importantly, track down the millions of items looted by the Nazis. It was a treasure hunt in the middle of a war zone, where the treasure was the collective memory of Western civilization. In April of 1945, with the war nearing its end, they received a critical tip. Deep within the Austrian mountains, in a vast salt mine at Altaussee, the Nazis had hidden their greatest plunder. When the Monuments Men arrived and ventured into the subterranean labyrinth, what they found took their breath away. It wasn't just a stash. It was a civilization in exile. 6,000 priceless paintings, including Michelangelo's Bruges, Madonna, Vermeer's The Astronomer, and masterpieces by Rembrandt, Rubens, and Van Eyck. But alongside this staggering collection of beauty, they found something else: 8 massive, 500-kilogram aerial bombs, wired and ready to detonate. Hitler had issued his Nero decree, a scorched earth order, stating that if he and the Nazi Party were destroyed, then all of Germany, including its cultural treasures, must be destroyed with them. The plan was to seal the mine and obliterate everything inside, ensuring that if Germany couldn't have these treasures, no one could. The situation was incredibly tense. The Monument's men were not bomb disposal experts, but as they prepared for the worst, they discovered an incredible act of quiet rebellion. Local Austrian salt miners, who had been forced to work for the Nazis, had learned of the plan. Defying direct SS orders and risking certain execution, they had secretly removed the detonators from the bombs, one by one, rendering them useless. Thanks to their courage, the Monument's men were able to secure the mine. Humanity's heritage, hidden in the heart of a mountain, had survived. By the end of the war, the Monument's men had located and recovered over 5 million cultural artifacts and returned them to their rightful countries, an astounding achievement. But their story reminds us that heroes in this war came in many forms, and not all of them wore an Allied uniform. Sometimes, the most confounding acts of heroism came from the most unexpected places. To find our next story, we must travel to the other side of the world. Nanking, China, December 1937. The Second Sino-Japanese War is raging. The Japanese Imperial Army has just captured the city, then the capital of China. What unfolded next is an event so horrific it is often called the Forgotten Holocaust of World War II. For 6 weeks, the city of Nanking was plunged into a nightmare. This was the Nanking Massacre. Japanese soldiers engaged in an orgy of violence. An estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians and unarmed soldiers were systematically murdered. Tens of thousands of women, from young girls to elderly grandmothers, were subjected to brutal sexual violence. Soldiers went door to door, dragging people into the streets for execution. Entire neighborhoods were looted and then burned. It's the Eastern Front, 1942, deep in the freezing. Brutal war between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. German soldiers are starting to hear whispers. A new fear is stalking them in the dead of night. It's a sound they can't quite place, a soft, eerie whoosh, like a broomstick sweeping across the sky. And then, explosions. They give this phantom a name, Der Nachtexen. The Night Witches. Who were these terrifying figures? And what's the real story behind the legend? At the height of the war, the Soviet Union was in a desperate situation. They were losing pilots faster than they could be replaced. So, in a move that was completely unheard of at the time, they made a radical decision. Create 3 all-female combat aviation regiments. Out of TSC-1 would become the stuff of legend, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. This wasn't just a token gesture. These women weren't flying transport planes far from the front lines. They were frontline combat bomber pilots, sent on the most dangerous missions imaginable. And who were these women? Not seasoned veterans. Many were just teenagers, some barely 20 years old. They had volunteered, leaving behind lives as students, factory workers, and instructors to defend their homeland. But their equipment was anything but Statuviard. Forget advanced fighters. They were given Polikarpov Putu South. These weren't warplanes. They were basically flying coffins. Flimsy biplanes made of plywood and canvas, originally designed for crop dusting and pilot training. Their top speed was a pathetic 94 miles per hour, so slow that German fighters had trouble shooting them down because the Russian planes were flying slower than the German stall speed. Think about that. You're going into combat against one of the most advanced air forces in the world in a plane made of wood and fabric. They had no radios to call for help, no parachutes to escape a crippled plane. Their only defense was a single rifle for the navigator, which was pretty much useless in a night sky. Their cockpit was open to the elements, meaning they flew in sub-zero temperatures, often getting frostbite on their faces and hands. The controls would freeze solid. They had no modern navigation equipment, just a map and a compass. This was primitive, brutal, and incredibly dangerous. So how did they become so feared? Through sheer ingenuity and unbelievable courage. Their signature tactic was as brilliant as it was terrifying. As they approached their targets, typically German encampments, supply depots, or artillery positions, the pilot would cut the engine completely. The plane would then glide silently over the enemy, the only sound being the soft rustle of the wind over the canvas wings. This is the sound that gave them their name, the whoosh of the witch's broomstick. Once over the target, the navigator, who was often leaning out of the open cockpit, would hand-drop the bombs. After the payload was delivered, the pilot would restart the engine and climb away into the darkness, leaving chaos and confusion behind. For the German soldiers on the ground, it was pure psychological warfare. 1 minute, there's silence. The next, bombs are raining down from a seemingly empty sky. It was unnerving, relentless, and demoralizing. The Germans became so spooked that they started spreading rumors. They claimed the night witches were given special injections and pills, some sort of dangerous drugs that gave them perfect night vision, like cats. The truth, of course, was far more impressive. They weren't chemically enhanced. They were just that good. Their skill, their knowledge of their flimsy aircraft, and their absolute fearlessness were their only secret weapons. The Germans even created a special award, the Iron Cross, for any pilot who managed to shoot down one of these slow-moving ghosts. The numbers are staggering. The Night Witches flew over 30,000 combat missions in total. They dropped more than 23,000 tons of bombs on enemy forces. Some individual pilots were almost superhuman in their endurance. It wasn't uncommon for a pilot and navigator to fly 8, 10, or even more missions in a single night. Imagine taking off in your fragile plane, flying into a hail of anti-aircraft fire, dropping your bombs, and landing only to refuel, rearm, and do it all over again, and again, and again, until dawn. One of the most famous night witches, Nadezhda Popova, flew an incredible 852 combat missions. She was shot down multiple times and survived. She, along with 22 other members of the regiment, was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military honor the nation could bestow. Their battle wasn't just against the enemy. They also had to fight a war against prejudice within their own military. When the all-female regiments were formed, many male pilots and commanders were openly scornful. They were mocked, belittled, and given hand-me-down equipment. The women were issued old, worn-out male uniforms and boots that were too big. They had to use pencils for eyeliner and map scraps for paper. They were seen as a joke, a propaganda stunt, but their results spoke for themselves. Night after night, they proved their worth, becoming one of the most effective and decorated units in the entire Soviet Air Force. They didn't just earn respect, they demanded it through their actions. Their motto was, "You are a woman, you are a person, you must endure." And endure. They did, but their service came at a great cost. 30 of the Night Witches were killed in combat. Their planes were so flammable that if they were hit by tracer rounds, they would burn up in seconds. Knowing this, the pilots made a pact. None of them would ever be captured alive. If their plane was hit and they couldn't make it back, they would choose to crash their plane into the ground or a target, taking their own lives rather than facing surrender. Not a single Night Witch was ever taken prisoner. After the war, their incredible story was largely buried. In the Soviet Union, their heroism was downplayed, hidden away in dusty archives. The world largely forgot about the teenage girls who flew crop dusters into the heart of the German war machine. But in recent decades, their story has been rediscovered, and they are finally being recognized for what they were: pioneers, patriots, and some of the most effective and courageous combat pilots of World War II, are a powerful reminder that heroes can come from anywhere, and that courage has no gender. Thank you so much. Operation Mincemeat, The Monuments Men, John Rabe. The Night Witches. You've probably heard of D-Day, Pearl Harbor, and stuff. These are the thunderous events that define our memory of World War II. But what if I told you the war was also won in whispers, in secret operations, so bizarre, so audacious, they sound like they were ripped from a Hollywood script. This wasn't a war fought only by soldiers with guns. It was fought by artists with inflatable tanks, spies disguised as corpses, and teenage girls flying rickety planes under the cover of darkness. These are the stories that were hidden in the margins of history books, the battles fought in the shadows. Let's start with one of the most brilliant deceptions in military history, the Ghost Army. Officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, this was a unit of about 1,100 men, But they weren't your typical soldiers. They were artists, actors, sound engineers, and designers, recruited from the art schools of New York and Philadelphia. Their mission: to impersonate entire U.S. Army divisions. They used an incredible arsenal of tricks: inflatable rubber tanks, trucks blasting pre-recorded sounds of troop movements, and fake radio chatter to create the illusion of massive armies where there were none. Imagine this. You're a German soldier peering through your binoculars. You see what looks like a 30-ton Sherman tank, but then you see, for American GIs, casually lift it up and move it. The psychological impact was immense. The Ghost Army could make a force of 1,000 men seem like 30,000, drawing enemy divisions away from real Allied attack points. They operated dangerously close to the front lines, sometimes just a few hundred yards from the enemy. Their only real weapons being their creativity and courage. Their operations in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany are estimated to have saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. And for over 40 years after the war, their entire existence was classified. It was a phantom menace, a theatrical performance on the grandest stage of all. Now, let's move from the battlefields of France to a cold morgue in London. This is the stage for Operation Mincemeat, a plan so macabre and ingenious it sounds like fiction. In 1943, the Allies were planning to invade Sicily, but they needed to trick the Germans into thinking the attack was coming elsewhere, specifically Greece and Sardinia. The idea, born from the mind of naval intelligence officer Ewan Montague, was to plant false documents on a dead body and let it wash ashore in Spain, where it would be found by pro-German officials. But where do you find a body? They found the body of a homeless man who had recently died. They gave him a new identity: Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. They dressed him in a uniform, filled his pockets with personal items, love letters from a fictional fiancée, ticket stubs from a London theater, to make his identity believable. The most crucial item was a briefcase chained to his wrist, containing fake letters between high-ranking British generals that explicitly mentioned the invasion of Greece. The body was dropped by a submarine off the coast of Spain. The Spanish found it, the Germans took the bait, and Hitler diverted crucial troops and resources away from Sicily to Greece. When the Allies invaded Sicily, they met far less resistance than expected. This one dead man, this man who never was, changed the course of the war in the Mediterranean. While some fought with deception, others fought to save a different kind of casualty. 1,000 years of Western culture. Meet the Monuments Men. This group of about 350 men and women art historians, museum curators, and architects were tasked with a monumental mission: to go into the heart of the war zone and rescue the artistic treasures being looted by the Nazis. Hitler wasn't just conquering nations, he was systematically stealing their cultural identity, stockpiling masterpieces by Michelangelo, Vermeer, and Da Vinci for his planned Forum Musia. The Monuments Men were often middle-aged, academics turned soldiers, racing against time. They followed Allied armies, sometimes under fire, navigating through the chaos of bombed-out cities. They found troves of stolen art hidden in the most unlikely places: salt mines, castles, and remote monasteries. In the Altaussee salt mine in Austria alone, they discovered over 6,500 paintings, including masterpieces like the Ghent altarpiece. They not only saved these irreplaceable works from theft, but also from destruction, as Nazi officials had orders to destroy the caches rather than let them fall into Allied hands. They were fighting a war for memory, for civilization itself, ensuring that the legacy of human creativity would survive the ravages of war. Our next story takes us to China, and to a man who proves that heroes can be found in the most unexpected of places. John Rabe was a German businessman and, believe it or not, the head of the Nazi party in Nanking. When the Japanese Imperial Army invaded the city in 1937, what followed was a horrific period known as the Nanking Massacre. The city descended into chaos and brutality. But instead of fleeing, Rabe, along with a small group of other Westerners, made a courageous choice. Using his status as a German and a Nazi ally of Japan at the time, he established the Nanking Safety Zone, a demilitarized area to shelter Chinese civilians. He opened up his own property to house over 600 refugees. He patrolled the zone, confronting Japanese soldiers, and repeatedly used his Nazi armband and swastika flag to stare down atrocities. and protect the people under his care. He wrote letters directly to Hitler, pleading for him to intervene. John Rabe, the good Nazi of Nanking, is credited with saving the lives of as many as 250,000 Chinese civilians. His story is a powerful, complex reminder that moral courage can defy political allegiance, and that one person's humanity can shine a light in the darkest of times. Finally, we look to the skies of the Eastern Front, where a different kind of legend was born. There were young women, most between 17 and 26 years old. The Germans called them Nachtwechseln, or the Night Witches. They were the 588th Night Bomber Regiment of the Soviet Air Forces, an all-female unit flying outdated, flimsy Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. These planes were made of wood and canvas, more suited for crop dusting than combat. They had no armor, no parachutes, and no radios. They could only carry 2 bombs at a time. Their strategy was one of pure stealth and nerve. They would fly in groups, cutting their engines as they neared their targets, and gliding in silently to drop their bombs. The only sound the Germans would hear was a whooshing noise, which they said sounded like a witch's broomstick sweeping through the night sky. The psychological terror they inflicted was enormous. They flew over 24,000 missions, often multiple sorties in a single night, braving freezing temperatures and heavy anti-aircraft fire. To be awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, a pilot had to complete 800 missions. 32 Night Witches earned this title. They were a testament to sheer grit, proving that even with the most primitive tools, the will to fight